Welcome to this video, where I am going to talk about the relevance of Alexander in education, particularly for teenagers and young adults. I see the relevance of the work for our younger students as bridging the gap in education between well-being and learning how to learn. The work can be seen as a framework for helping students to look after themselves, a toolkit for choosing to return to a state where they can be calm, confident and coordinated, teaching them to reach their potential in whatever they choose to learn or do. There is no denying the weight of challenges facing young people today. The education system is competitive, full of exams, social media can be a fierce jungle, and there is a lot of uncertainty and threat in the world. Some students can handle the challenges and the ups and downs of being human well, but most of us need a helping hand and a practical and philosophical path of ideas and practices can be very useful. Educators are agreed now that the big challenge facing young people today is mental health, and they see this as the crisis in the education world. We can see that this is linked to our idea about use, that an understanding of structural integration is vital for health. Our Alexander understanding of how the mind, body and emotions are integrated has so much to offer in secondary and tertiary education and brings about a new relevance for our work in those settings. It's helpful to contextualize our Alexander work to educators as the practice that can lead to emotional intelligence integrated with an embodied awareness. The education world is aware of the need to help students with resilience, impulse control, self-esteem, balance and well-being. Physical literacy is now spoken about, particularly in a sports context. All these things are so important to health and happiness. There is the wonderful mindfulness for children, the fine movement of philosophy for children, thinking about respectful citizenship. There is Anthony Selden talking about teaching character in schools, and there is even the Harmony Project of Richard Dune considering offering a curriculum for happiness. One of the wonderful things we are seeing grow, especially as the research develops, is the connection between ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience. We hear from neuroscience how the patterns of anxiety and fear that we humans embody are beginning to be understood, and that we are all wired up for threat for our own survival. How stimulus, whether it be from an outside threat or from our own thoughts, can trigger these patterns and sets of fear and anxiety and bring about the creation of a loop of messages between the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, so that negative emotions can become entrenched. Sometimes this can be the fast onset pattern of fight and flight, and sometimes there is a slow onset of the patterns of anxiety and depression, causing a great loss of energy and confidence. We can all become over-addicted to excitement, and this work of ours helps restore a sense of quiet, absorb a sense of safety, and operate from that centre. Perhaps this is more important now than ever. The polyvagal theory, originated by Stephen Porg, throws a powerful light on this, creating another useful context for our work. Young people are prone to getting stuck with these worrying signals, and feelings can be very powerful. Those signals can leave us with a sense of emergency, of continuously being on red alert. If young people don't yet have a way to notice this consciously and constructively choose their responses, these signals can become overwhelming. Research by Sarah Jane Blackmore on the teenage and young adult brain indicates that teenagers and young adults are more prone to risk-taking, less likely to notice how others are feeling, and yet be more influenced by their peers, and of course are in the midst of great physiological and hormonal change and growth. We can contextualize these patterns of fear and anxiety from the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems with our Alexander understanding of the startle and defense patterns of fight, flight, or freeze. All humans and animals react to fear and threat by getting smaller, holding their breath, and fixing their eyes, losing a safe connection with balance, support, and their environment. Looking and listening to young people, we see these predominant general patterns of startle and can begin to listen sensitively to everyone's different individual patterns. Perhaps one of the most important things to have a conversation about in lessons is getting caught up in destructive and enemy thoughts, thereby losing all connection with sensory perception and our human need to restore safety. Good to discuss what it is to feel things, what sensory perception is, and the links in connection. As Barbara Conable says, tension reduces sensation, and that includes proprioception and the sense of the environment. Particularly important with young people is keeping our sense of humour and hopefully restoring theirs. Socrates said, "We have a common sense when all the senses are integrated and we are more in charge of ourselves." I love the maxim that the best education is a conversation, and when talking with young students, I find they all relate to the idea of their mental chatter, their internal radio, as one student said, our very own Greek chorus. Often this internal dialogue has become the priority of what they notice, and it feels like who they are, and they are often at the mercy of it. To discuss and inquire into sensing and thinking is a priority, alongside discussing not thinking and all the different types of thinking that we have, and therefore create an understanding that we might be able to stop and choose how we think, that we might even be able to embody our thoughts, can be a revelation. That we might be able to step back from our emotions and not just be them, but understand why we have them and what needs they represent. That we usually have benevolent and happier emotions when our needs are met and our embodiment is free of unnecessary tension. That we can work towards having a backdrop of a mood which is calm and a body that is open and free. That we can be curious and imaginative and bring our intelligence to the whole self is an interesting discussion. We can wonder and explore together what gets in the way of that psychophysical work. This can be the beginning of an understanding of what we can be in control of, what we can influence, and what we just have to allow in life. This is interesting to young people whose priorities might be very different from ours. It can lead to an understanding of what constructive thinking is, as opposed to destructive thinking, and that we can learn to come back to finding our quiet strength. Constructive thinking includes the practice of being present. It gives young people a toolkit to re-establish being awake. The powerful practice of embodied presence is so valuable. Knowing how to reset through the toolkit of inhibition and direction is learning how to cue in safety and become ready to learn. It is as vital to sense safety, what we experience as being at home with ourselves, as it is to sense danger. Feedback can be hard for younger students, especially if they lack confidence and have had a lot of uncomfortable time with feedback in other lessons or from their peers. Some students have had difficult teacher-student relationships. I hope to create a congruence between how I teach, what I say, and the tone of my voice, and my hands-on work. Ideally to teach mostly through asking questions alongside giving useful information. This helps develop a curiosity about the work for younger students, I find. I intend to stick to the discipline of only giving positive and helpful feedback and encouraging students to develop that discipline towards themselves and others. We notice that it is often the students who are very critical of others who are the ones that get angry, restless, and overly nervous in performance and even in everyday challenges. Like learning any skill or language, this takes time and patience for both the teacher and the student. Alexander said he saw his work in terms of relativity, the relationship between the head and the back, perhaps between time and space too. As I like to say to students, you can't learn the Tchaikovsky violin concerto in your first lesson. It's good to be clear that it takes time to understand our work, as it goes against so many of the models younger students are used to. We can change the habit of a lifetime with a thought, but to live that change is a practice, not a destination. Principles such as endgaming versus the means whereby, trying hard, and how to adapt to change are very useful things to have an ongoing conversation about. We change as life changes around us. Children grow, their voices change, they move schools, all need adaptation. Our thinking can get stuck in the past or anxious future planning. We can establish as we teach that the work creates a benevolent relationship with ourselves, and this can grow into being the basis of having a benevolent relationship with others and the world around us. Through this approach, the work starts to get really useful to young people, especially as they are establishing their ideas and attitudes towards themselves and others. They can direct their energy in a positive direction. The work is about connecting, not correcting. Acceptance without judgment. This doesn't mean the work is any less rigorous. In fact, as we know, this deep path of kind self-acceptance is the work of self-development and can be a long journey. Students can recognize that they might have a punitive or unhelpful relationship with themselves and how they do things, and can begin to let that go. They come to see our work as nothing to do with the pressure of media, society and peers to have a perfect body or a particular size or shape. It's not about getting another thing right or having another thing to worry about. It's not about defining ourselves by how others treat us or see us. This can often include how some institutions make students feel unwelcome. Ours is the work of coming back to safety, belonging, and connection to finding significance and purpose in our lives. It's about being good with just being us and finding that might not have been who we thought we were. And it's about discovering a joy in learning, finding out how to respect our feelings and developing the strength to understand our needs and let go of the signals of fear, shame, regret, and even sometimes of feeling sorry for ourselves. Directions can cue in a return to safety. What does it look like, this safety, especially in this world of uncertainty? How can we create a safe uncertainty for young people? Our students might not know yet, as so much is below conscious level for many of us. We might need to work on the understanding of how we might not yet have the information. We all get things wrong and in a muddle, so we can forgive ourselves. This, as Daniel Coyle says in the Talent Code, is the path forwards in learning. Changing our priority from trying harder to get things right to the curiosity of how am I doing this and can it be easier? What might I be able to change? Some people have a gift, but mostly learning is a talent that's grown through intelligent thought and movement practiced over many hours. Learning to make these hours about the means whereby of learning, not mindless repetition and activity, is important for helping to avoid injury, boredom, and perhaps most of all, mind wandering. Knowing how to chunk things up into small, doable and non-doable tasks, how to take breaks, and then put everything back together is invaluable work. Learning that learning is problem solving, not only remembering facts under the pressure of exams. We all get fake news, as one student described faulty sensory awareness, and that is another very useful principle to understand. The nature of embodied memory tends to adapt to habit. We might not have noticed that we pull down under pressure, or when we overconcentrate and endgame. That we might be holding our breath, flinching, be stuck in a torsion, standing on one leg, crossing our legs at the computer, fixing our necks, tensing our faces and our linguistic muscles. We might think we are doing something quite differently to what we are actually doing. We might not have noticed that our minds wander when we need them to be present to the task in hand and present with the world around us. We might not have noticed being restless and anxious all the time. Young people are sitting for hours and hours a day, often in very unsuitable chairs. How could they not lose a sense of quiet wholeness and access to that wider field of attention and awareness that includes our embodiment in the environment under those conditions? We help students then to find out not just a balance in their bodies, but where they can find a balance in their lives. It's good to remember some students have punishing schedules, difficult family lives, and have no sense of how to notice when they are upset, tired, bored, or angry. Teaching students how to rebalance the work, rest, and play of life is fundamental for finding a good energy. Some students keep making the choices to stay up very late every night, are always late for class, constantly tired, and become addicted to destructive habits. Alexander work can help students notice these habits on a behavioural level. We can restore students' energy in class and help them to think about making different choices and taking responsibility for themselves. Directed activities are so useful for this, giving students a repertoire to work around and apply the principles to is essential for their understanding and contextualizing of the work. Semi-supine is beloved of very many students and is a very restorative practice. Understanding it as a directed activity and that it develops not just as a rest, but as an understanding of releasing into easy flow and expansion of opposing forces rather than relaxing and collapsing is good. Building the ideas of finding health in sitting and standing and walking, as well as in high performance activities. A useful reference for reading about a somatic curriculum in schools is The Embodied Teen by Susan Bauer, and another wonderful book on how to integrate these ideas is Moving to Learn by Michelle Arsenal. Both reference Alexander principles. Sue, Mary and I have created trainings, handbooks of ideas and curriculums for taking the work into schools and colleges, creating age-appropriate materials. We also hope that the research will grow in this field. Understanding the connection that the primary control gives to wholeness, our feet, our backs, our heads, all together is wonderful. Noticing what the blockages are of our mindsets and embodiment can be the way to restore a joy in learning. A demonstration of how to chunk activities up into small sections and bring them back into a flow state is exciting and empowering. When young people find that connecting with our work, they get better at the skills that they love as well as feeling more comfortable in every day. It's worth remembering that the incidence of back pain in younger people is growing as their lives become more sedentary and they get stuck on chairs, phones and computers. Dart work, again, is so useful for taking the work of integration into movement and so helpful for letting go of old ideas of posture, positions. It moves students' thinking into the work of being interested in a condition of freedom, poise and structural strength. They start to connect to embodying with how they sit, stand, run and move. Connect to how they bend, rotate, stretch, release weight, find leverage and the great power of opposition in direction. It's hard to be upset, bitter, angry, tired, bored or fearful when you are truly embodying a sense of freedom and a connection to safe support and coordination. When you have a free neck and a wonderful sense of wholeness. Props are very useful to show ideas. A favourite one at the moment is the Hoberman sphere to show releasing but not collapsing while breathing. I often ask students to bring along a picture that they see as great use. Often these are surprising and hilarious as well as touching. I asked one of my dear sons to bring along a video demonstrating the primary control for younger students, thinking we'd find a video of Mr. Alexander. In fact, he brought along a clip of Clark Kent changing into Superman in his thoughts as he tells Lois Lane who he is.
Lois, for goodness sake, didn't you hear me knocking?
Uh-huh.
Lois, we did have a date tonight, remember?
Oh.
Lois?
Huh?
You haven't been,
Oh, no.
Well, I should certainly hope not. Well, let's, push off, shall we?
I better get a coat. It might be kind of cold up. No, I mean, I need a purse. I have to fix my hair and some blush on.
Lois, there's something I have to tell you. I'm really... I was, at first, really nervous about tonight.
This can show us these stories about how important it is to have a free neck and a deep connection. Games are essential for teaching through learning and play. I shall show a couple of ones we use on the Developing Self course in some of the shorter videos on the site. Learning about structure in lessons can be life-changing. We all know that. Understanding that our spines are not straight and don't like being bent in a forwards banana all day, as this puts us under pressure, is good to remember. We are animals of volume. We are not made of flat surfaces or straight lines. Finding out where our heads balance is just such useful information. We can notice that we lose structure, breath and freedom when we are under pressure. This often happens when we make mistakes and when we feel we have got something wrong or been hurt and find it hard to forgive ourselves and others. Seeing our work as a transferable skill is so important. Sometimes we need to remind students that they have learnt a skill, and that skill may need to be repeated many times. Being able to notice when we transition from one activity to another that we might lose a sense of wholeness and connection is useful. We know that end-gaining in activity, especially activity that means a lot to us, will have so many sets connected with its execution. Often, the conversations in class are about physical pain in relation to playing, sitting and learning, as well as emotional hurts. Our practical philosophy, like Eastern martial arts, gives a benevolent alternative to a competitive and anxious system of how to be in education. It will be important for us to consider the ways of teaching and making our work truly relevant to young people and the education world. I have seen how many students go on from early lessons to devote their lives to Alexander work, going on to train to be teachers, and how most of them see it as a deeply useful skill to have in their pockets, how it can inspire them to develop and grow. How can we do this in our world, making it relevant to young people? I like to think by holding our opinions and principles lightly, exemplifying that the work is, of course, making connections and developing students' independent ideas and thoughts. In that way, our work empowers and inspires young people to take the driving seat of their lives, find a resilience, restore health and humour, and even work out how to be in a constructive relationship with themselves and others. All the fine teachers I have worked with and alongside over the years have exemplified the work as the practice of trust, respect, and kindness towards themselves and others. Seeing this as an integral part of the quiet strength of our work, I regard these qualities as the emotional embodiment that inhibition can restore us to, and a component part of allowing a non-doing state as we move into well-coordinated activity. I hope that the organisation of the whole self, integrating emotional intelligence with embodied awareness, will be the evolution of our technique. I take great heart from John Dewey, as you may know, a champion of Alexander's work and a leading light in the education world. He said that the work gave him a freedom of opinion, the ability to hold a view and change it, and to benevolently disagree with other people. What a powerful and peaceful skill to teach young people, how to be in charge of ourselves whilst in relationship to others and present to the world around us. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.